What is up, guys? In this video we're going to be going over how pseudo classes and pseudo elements work and what they are exactly. So to get started, I created this sample HTML, and as you can see right now we have a header which says hello world, and as you can see the first letter is in a dark red, and also when we highlight it, it turns red behind and the text turns white. And this is using the pseudo elements that are provided by CSS. And another thing you should note is that when we hover over this square, it turns into a circle, and when we click on it and it becomes active, it actually becomes a bit smaller to give it a sort of clicking effect. And the same thing goes for the text down below. If you highlight it, you'll notice that the background turns red and the text turns white. And all of this is thanks to pseudo elements and pseudo classes. But let's get started immediately with the HTML. We're going to go ahead and type in h1, and we're going to give this a class, which is going to be called title. And you can give it whatever title you want. This time I'm just going to type in Code Palace. Then we're going to create a div, and we're going to give this an ID of circle, since there's only going to be one of them and it's very specific. Then we're going to go ahead and insert a paragraph. So let's go ahead and type in p class, and we're just going to call this description. And inside here you can type this is a description, or whatever text you want. Now let's go ahead and save, and since I'm running a live server, you'll notice that you'll end up with something similar to this. Now let's go to our styles.css and let's add a few attributes. So the first element we want to edit is the body. And we're going to change the margin to 0 pixels, which will just get rid of the default margin. And we're going to go ahead and add a display of flex. And I'm going to go over this in another video, but for now, just copy what I'm putting. And then we are going to add a flex direction, which is going to be column, which means things will be put on top of each other rather side to side, because the default is row. And we want to align items to the center. And all of this is going to be used to put the text and the description into the center of the page. Then we're going to go ahead and type in justify content and also add center to that. And then we're going to also type height and type in 100 VH, which is the view height. And view height just adapts to whatever screen size you have. It will get that height and use that as the maximum height of the window. So now when you go ahead and click on save, you'll notice that everything will be perfectly centered inside our web page, regardless of the size and the height. The next thing to do, of course, is to edit the circle. So we're just going to type in circle, and we're going to add an attribute called box sizing, and it's going to be border box. And we have to go ahead and specify a height attribute, which is going to be 100 pixels, and a width of 100 pixels. Then we're going to give this a background color of gray, and I prefer it to be a much lighter gray, so I'll drag it over here. And we're going to give it a border radius of 10 pixels. We're going to add a transition to make it a lot smoother when we switch between the hover view and the regular view. And that's going to be of 0.5 seconds. And finally, we want the cursor to be a pointer when we hover over it, so it looks like a link. Now when we click on save, you'll notice we'll get this interesting cube. And when we hover over it, you'll notice that it'll turn into a pointer. And now it's time to get to the first pseudo class, which is hashtag circle hover. So right now, this will specify the CSS attributes that should be applied when we hover over the element, such as let's change the background color to crimson. And let's make the border radius 100% so it turns into a circle. So now when we hover over it, it's going to turn into a circle. And if you actually go here, or if you actually delete this part here, you'll notice that there are actually a lot of these. And you definitely need to research this online to find out all of them, because it is far too much to explain. But the most useful ones you'll use most often are the hover and the active and link. And these are the very basic ones, of course. But for now, we will leave the hover, and we will go ahead and add another one, which is hash circle, and this one's going to be called active. So this is what happens when we click on the circle, and we are going to scale it down to 0.9 or 90% of its original width and height, and we want to give it a background color of gray. So now if we hover over it, you'll notice it will turn crimson, and if we click on it, it's going to turn gray and become a bit smaller. So those are some very nice and simple effects you can add just by adding pseudo classes to your current CSS file. Now let's move on to pseudo elements. And pseudo elements, as you can hear in the name, are used to edit the elements directly. So that can mean the text or the text selection and so on. So let's go ahead and refer to our title. We're going to do .title because that's the class I gave it. And let's pretend we want to change the first letter. And as you can see right here in the recommendations, we have first letter. Or if you have multiple lines, you can also decide to change only the first line. So it's something that can help you edit certain parts of an element with ease. So we're going to change the color for the first letter to crimson, because that's something very simple. And then click on Save. And as you can see right there, the C has now become red for the header element and only for the first letter. And then let's move on to the selection pseudo element, which is .title selection. And every time we select some text with this selection pseudo element, it will use the CSS that we use in this block right here. So for example, let's go to background color and change it to crimson. And let's change the font color to white so we can see it with a nice contrast, and click on Save. Now when we actually select our title, you'll notice that we'll get a red background and some white text. And that has not been applied to this down here, so that's not working yet. But of course, it shouldn't be that hard to apply it to something else. We're just going to add a comma and refer to our description. And add the selection pseudo element. Now when we hover over our description, you'll notice that that also becomes red in the background and the text becomes white as we select it. So as you can see, that was a very basic intro to how pseudo elements and pseudo classes can be used in CSS. There are plenty that you can use, of course, and you should definitely go to W3 Schools or some other site that can explain to you all of them. But this was more of a very elementary understanding on how you can use it in CSS. With that being said, thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next video.